Привет, Katila. Ja, ni хорошо. Because today we are going to, well, you can say take a bit of a deep dive into what I think causes the differences that we see in this world and in our societies, and I hope to give people a fresh new insight on how to see the world. So first we need to cast off a few dogmas that dominate the prevailing thoughts in the Western world, and the biggest one is the idea of equality. I have stated many times that equality is the false god of this modern era, and it is one of the biggest falsehoods that guide almost the entire left-wing agenda, as they perceive any sort of inequality or imbalance as an injustice, or is created by some sort of vague systemic oppression. It is important that we first dispel with the false god of equality. Inequality is everywhere. It's a fact of life. And I'm not just talking about, say, the differences between groups of people or people themselves. I'm talking that cultures are unequal and lead to different results, that religions are unequal and lead to different results, etc., etc. Men and women are different. A thought experiment I bring out to show the absurdity of equality is, the reason why, for example, there's not a lot of female infantry officers and that they're really rare, is not because we don't give them toy soldiers when they're young, it's because of innate biological differences between men and women. Another example is the differences of culture or religion. The reason why Islam is more violent than, say, Buddhism is because of the fundamental contents that are within Islam. It is a lot easier to justify violence than it is to justify violence in the name of, say, Zen Buddhism, for example. People are different. Groups are different, cultures are different, values are different. There is nothing more constant in life than inequality, and we need to embrace it for what it is, or else we will run our societies inefficiently and degrade it to even a lower level as we treat everything the same. It's really important to try to debunk these fundamental misunderstandings of the world, like we are all born equal. This is a major idea that underpins left-wing thought, and even basic right-wing thought in the West. This is why they need to use political correctness, because the reality of the situation that we're not all equal does not live up to their worldview. The reason why there is inequality is because of some systemic issue, not the inherent inequality between groups. Because they bought into that everyone and everything is equal, and should be equal. And where they are not, something went wrong, and they continue to push a destructive agenda that will be for naught, because their underlying assumptions of the world and people are wrong. So, inequality is a lie, so if we're not all equal, what is the nature of humans and our relationship to others? And what explains and accounts for the differences we see in the world? So I present to you what I call the 4 factors of man: the biological, the cultural, the societal, and the individual initiative. These 4 factors, when brought together, can explain what we see in the world and the inequality it presents, and the differences that we see from various types of outcomes. So, the first factor of man is the biological. This is fundamentally what we are, in our genes, in our brain chemistry, etc., etc. Biology is perhaps the most fundamental, as it is essentially sets our fates. Think of it this way: there's a spectrum of human possibility that can happen just based on what the brain can do. Now, not all brains are within that large spectrum. Your brain can only operate within a certain limit in that large spectrum of possibility. Not everyone can be an Einstein, even if you study your damnedest and work your ass off. Unless your brain is like Einstein's, you won't ever reach that level. But you can become smarter than someone whose brain might favor them for being more intelligent. It's just going to be a lot more harder for you to surpass them if they just decide not to go to their full potential. There are group averages in intelligence, physical ability, creativity, etc., etc. Now, does that mean even though, say, blacks on average have a lower IQ than Asians, that there is no such thing as a black person that can be really smart and an Asian person that can be really dumb? Of course not. All this shows that if things run their course, on average, for blacks, it would be, on average, we would expect blacks to underperform and Asians to overperform in terms of raw intelligence. Does anyone ask why there are a lot of, say, fast runners that are black, that are black West Africans and not, say, Turks? It's because of biological. Again, that does not mean, say, Turks can't run faster than a random black person. Turk can run faster than a black person. It's just that on average, we should expect that black West Africans will run faster on average. Another example of biological difference is between men and women. There is an ingrained biological need to nurture from women, and this is why you see a lot of women in childcare, nursing, and teachers, while men who are naturally more stronger are in heavy-duty work, such as construction, military, etc. Does that mean that a woman can't be stronger than a man? Of course not. Just that if you take 100 men and 100 women and pair them up randomly on a one-on-one fight, just expect the man to beat up the woman 9 out of 10 times. The point of biology is that we are not surprised by the natural choices groups of people generally choose. This gives us a firm reality on people's differences in intelligence, athleticism, and countless other examples. And while they are not destiny for everyone within a group, they are a great tool to understand why groups are the way they are and what to expect from them. The idea that we can all be molded into the same thing is nonsense. Biology does not wield it, and thus the idea that society can make us all act the same is ludicrous. The second factor of man is cultural, so the culture and norms and values that this individual is born and raised in. An example I give is the idea of human rights. Now, that's a cultural idea. We try to respect human rights because that is what we expect from our culture. But would we still care, say, if we were born and raised in Saudi Arabia with a fundamentalist mindset? No, we would think things differently. There is a reason why Swedes try to treat, even violent criminals as humanely as possible, and ISIS terrorists cut off people's heads who don't believe in the same God as they do. It's because of culture. Cultures make or break civilizations, and I will also say that biology is also what makes the culture. For example, we have a cultural thing that if a woman slaps a man, that might be seen as a bad thing, but not as bad if a man slaps a woman. That's because of the underlying biology that a man is generally stronger than a woman. It's not 100% that, biology isn't 100% like culture, but the innate biology of groups of people manifest themselves in the culture they make. If you grow up in, say, a warrior culture where sacrifice, duty, and honor are held up, then you end up like Imperial Japan, who never surrendered until they were nuked into submission. If your culture rewards laziness, materialism, narcissism, you will have people born and raised in those societies that will have those values. And as we all know, not all values and cultures are equal. Certain cultural factors can make a civilization thrive or decay. Certain cultural values lead to different results. So, for example, there's a stereotype of Asians in America being very hardworking and just sticking their nose in textbooks all day, and their parents expect a lot from them. Now, that's not true for every Asian, but it's a good rule of thumb. Now, if you insert, say, a white person or a Hispanic person in that culture, will they be better off raised in that type of mindset than, say, in a more relaxed and careless environment? Well, yes. Now, biological difference do come into play, and Asians do have higher IQs, but if an Asian grows up in a gang/thug culture and a Hispanic person grew up in a very strict, conservative, high expectations environment, it will favor the Hispanic, even though the Asian might have it easier to be intelligent. The culture allowed the Hispanic to rise above his limits, even though it might be a bit harder for him to do so, if he has an average IQ of a Hispanic. It's important to have our cultures reinforce our biology, and this creates an organic and healthy society that runs more efficient and works as it respects the natural order and human nature. I would also say that a lot of these culture is essential for if we want to get the results we want. The reason why we have hookup culture or this culture that just tries to get all this materialism and there's no connection anymore is because of our culture. So culture is really, really important for civilization. The third factor of man is societal. Now, this is the factor that most of the left wing puts their case in and focuses in, and this is where they put all their eggs in the societal basket. But in truth, this is just a part to explain the differences between people. Yes, having great schools, high developed technology, great health centers, efficient transport, etc., that does have an impact on the outcomes of populations. I mean, do I even need to bring out the data? I mean, it's just common sense if you think about it. But having said that, and throwing a little bit of meat to my left-wing friends, I need to have a big caveat to this. It is the biology and the culture that inform how great those things can last. Let me give you an example. If you come from a culture that undervalues education and puts an emphasis on delinquency, it does not matter how great the schools are in your neighborhood, because those people won't take advantage of them. And hell, even if they did, there is biological factors that come into play. It's going to be a lot harder for someone who has an IQ of 85 to make it in a school that is running on the expectation that everyone has an IQ of 100, for example. So even if you have the best schools, you're going to have to dumb it down because some groups are on average less intelligent and some cultures undervalue the even idea of education. But they do count for something, and having that, strong schools, transportation, hospitals, etc., to boost the overall performance is something that's just a part into why we see the difference. But there has to be the right biology and culture that must be in place for these to even work. The fourth and last factor of man is the individual factor. Now, there is something to be said about individual initiative and willpower. Everything I've mentioned before are things that give limits and set boundaries, but how we thrive within those boundaries is where this individual factor comes in and explains a lot of the difference. God knows I can attest to this. So I'm not the most physically strong individual. I mean, I'm not fat, but I'm a pretty scrawny type of guy. I'm more of a bookworm who analyzes and analyzes everything that comes to me. And despite all that, I joined the Marine Corps. But it was because I really wanted to be a Marine that I pushed through it for almost 2 whole months at Marine Corps boot camp, and just based purely on mental willpower. I'm not biologically the stronger person, and I did not grow up in a military culture or a family that asked or demanded much of me. And so boot camp destroyed me, and the DIs ravished me every day. And I mean, maybe I was doomed from the start. But because of my individual initiative, that pushed this allowed me to push through it a lot more than most. Even if at the end of the day I did not make it. Now, it's not all about that individual drive. If you take, say, an average Asian, and he grows up in a strict culture of hard work and dedication, and goes to a well-funded private school with no crime. And then you take a black person who has no support structure, is surrounded by drug and gang culture, lives in a crime-filled neighborhood with run-down schools and roads, with no family. Even if they both had the same willpower and put all their effort to be better, the Asian person will do a hell of a lot better on average, even if they put in the same amount of effort. I'm not saying it's impossible for that black person to reach out and claim their place. They can. It's up to them to make the most out of their situation, and maybe they can make it a little bit. But I'm just saying that there's a lot of other factors that lead to the outcomes we see for every group. So those are the 4 factors of man: biological, cultural/values, societal, and individual. For the more libertarian-focused of us, we put all our focus on the individual. We think that that is just pure willpower that drives us and shows our status in life. But this ignores the limits of human potential and the world that the other factors create for that individual. Because as we know, we are not a one-man island. The world around us shapes us, our destiny, and our worldview to a large degree. Lots of the left wing focus on the societal aspect of it, thinking that if we just have fancy new schools or tech, we will make everyone equal. But this ignores the culture and biology that leads to these great advancements, but also the capacity and the willingness to even use those more advanced tools of society. The mainstream right likes to focus the entire of their reasoning and of the differences between people on culture, that with the right culture everyone can thrive, while not seeing the biological difference that create those cultures and how certain groups have it easier or harder to maintain and sustain those cultures. And thus, and then the next, and this is even a criticism of the alt-right or the far-right or whatever, that I put the main stack in biology, but we must be careful not to put 100% of all difference of society on biology, because while it is the kind of the base or the root that everything else stems from, it is not the end-all be-all, and on the dissident right, we need to make sure we don't make that mistake. The true nature of man is embracing all 4 factors. It is almost like a pyramid, but we need to embrace every single part, and you need the bottom secured so the next step can run more smoothly. But it is not required, just more efficient. The base is biology, the next is cultural, the next is societal, and the top is individual. So that is my 4 factors of man. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you like, comment, and share this video, and spread it around if you wish. And if you like to really must, please check out my Patreon. So aim high, wander on, from America with Russian love.